Today we'll talk about Clorinde.
Wait a minute.
Wait, no, I mean Clorinde. We'll see everything about her kit in this one video. We'll go through her elemental skill, constellations, talents, builds, weapons, best teams, and more. So after watching this video, you will be a certified Clorinde main. Starting with the more important stuff, which is her skill. When you use her skill, she enters a state called the Night Vigil. What it does is, her normal attacks will be converted into electro-charged pistol attacks, as you can see here. And this electro infusion cannot be overridden by any other type of infusion. Also during this phase, she will be unable to use her charged attacks. Not that it matters much. Also, the cooldown on her skill is going to be 16 seconds, and the Night Vigil state lasts for 7.5 seconds. And when she's in this state, her elemental skill's effect will change as well. So when you click it after she enters the Night Vigil state, she'll dash forward with her sword dealing electro damage. As for how many times you can do it, there's no limit as of now, so you can just spam it for as long as her Night Vigil lasts. Also, the damage done through her dashing is considered as her normal attack damage. Seeing this, if you are thinking, is this good for traveling? So showing the actual footage is kinda risky, as Hoyoverse might get angry. But let's take Yelan for comparison. So she's definitely faster than Clorinde in terms of traveling, but Clorinde's skill lasts longer so she can travel further. Now that you know what her skill does, let's move in further, as there's more to her skill and it goes deeper. Also, before going in further, know that Clorinde uses the Bond of Life mechanics. Now inside Night Vigil, she's gonna have two more modes, which are Swift Hunt and Impale the Night. Going into Swift Hunt, how it works is, if you have a Bond of Life which is 100% of her max HP or greater, she performs normal electro-infused attacks. And if the Bond of Life is less than 100%, then every time she uses her electro-infused normal attacks, it'll grant her a Bond of Life that'll be based on her HP, which will be 35% of her max HP. Along with that, the shots she fires can pierce and deal increased damage to opponents. So try not to max out your Bond of Life and keep it below 100% for maximum damage. Now going into Impale the Night, this is where that Bond of Life will be used. How it works is, it will have 3 different effects and it'll activate one at a time depending on how much Bond of Life Clorinde has. So basically this is dependent on Bond of Life. The amount of Bond of Life and effect are as the following. If the Bond of Life value is 0%, then she'll just perform a normal dashing strike. If the Bond of Life value is less than 100% of her max HP, then she will consume that Bond of Life and heal herself based on that Bond of Life value, and the AoE of the dashing attack's damage is increased. And if the value of the Bond of Life is equal to or greater than 100% of her max HP, then she'll just perform the previous mentioned effect, but the healing multiplier will be increased, and damage dealt by her dash attack will be increased even further. This particular effect is known as Impale the Night Pact. As for the values of these Bond of Life heals, they aren't that huge, so she'll basically just heal herself for as much Bond of Life you have. So if you have a Bond of Life worth 100 HP, she'll heal herself for 100 HP. Still, if you want to know the values, here they are. So typically how you'd want to use her is, use her skill, then normal attacks 3 times, then use her skill again. So in practice it should look something like this. Attack, 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 dash, attack, 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 dash. In addition to all of these, when Clorinde is in her Night Vigil state, you will only be able to heal her through her skill, which is through dashing. Other than that, all outside healings will just be converted into a Bond of Life for her. The conversion will be a percentage of the healing that she would have otherwise received. Going into a little bit of detail, this said percentage is going to be 80%. So if she receives a healing for 100 HP, then she'll get a Bond of Life worth 80 HP. This is very similar to Arlecchino, as she can't be healed either while in combat. Also, she is a main character. What I mean by that is not as in her personality, but her kit-wise. Because if you are in the Night Vigil state and then you swap to someone else and she goes out of the field, her skill will enter in cooldown. It's very similar to how Razor works, so be careful with this. It's pretty simple. So when you use her burst, she gives herself a Bond of Life based on her max HP and deals AoE electro damage to the enemies. The burst cost is going to be 60 energy, and it'll have a cooldown of 15 seconds. As for the Bond of Life she'll gain, it's going to be 120% of her max HP. In her passive 1, after a nearby party member triggers electro-related reactions, the electro damage dealt by Clorinde's pistol shots, and her burst will be increased by 20% of Clorinde's attack for 15 seconds, and it can have up to 3 stacks. Also, the maximum damage increase achievable this way is 1,800. In her second passive, she'll display the location of nearby resources unique to Fontaine on the minimap. In her third passive, if her bond of life is equal to or greater than 100% of her max HP, and the value increases or decreases, her crit rate will increase by 10% for 15 seconds, and it can have up to 2 stacks. Along with this, her external sources of healing to bond of life conversion will be increased from 80% to 100%. So if someone heals Clorinde for 100 HP while her skill is active, now she'll gain a bond of life worth 100 HP. Now coming to her constellations. In her C1, when you activate Clorinde's Night Vigil state and hit enemies with her Electro-infused normal attack, it will trigger 2 additional coordinated attacks near the hit opponent, each dealing 30% of Clorinde's attack as electro damage. It can only occur once every 1.2 seconds, and will be considered normal attack damage. Her C2 enhances her first passive talent. What it does is, now the values of that passive will be increased. So now when a party member triggers electro-related reactions, the electro damage dealt by Clorinde's normal attacks and burst will be increased by 30% for 15 seconds and can have up to 3 stacks. And the maximum damage increase you can obtain this way is 2,700. And along with all of this, when you have 3 stacks, her interruptions resistance will be increased. Her C3, it just increases the level of her skill by 3. Her C4 increases her burst damage, so when you use her burst and deal damage to the enemies, the damage dealt will increase based on Clorinde's bond of life percentage. As for the values, every 1% of bond of life you have will increase her burst's damage by 2%. The maximum burst damage you can obtain through this is 200%. Her C5, it'll just increase the level of her burst by 3. Her C6 is going to turn her into a really good DPS. It better do after you've spent so much money for it. What it does is, for 12 seconds after you have used her skill, her crit rate and crit damage will be increased by 10% and 70% respectively, and on top of that, while she's in her night vigil state, something known as a shade will appear and attack opponents, dealing 200% of Clorinde's attack as electro damage. This shade only appears under certain conditions, them being when she's about to be attacked, or when she performs Impale the Night Pact. So 1 shade can be summoned per second, and a total of 6 shades can be summoned throughout the duration of Night Vigil. And also, in addition to all of these, the damage she'll receive by enemies will be decreased by 80%, and her interruptions resistance will be increased as well, but these effects will disappear after her skill's duration ends or she summons all 6 of those shades. Now talking about her constellations, honestly it doesn't look like her full potential is locked behind her constellations or anything like that. Her constellations just allow her to deal more damage as a main DPS, but still, if you are going to pull for her constellations, stopping at C2 should be good enough. And if you don't plan on getting any other characters and have extra primos laying around, then going for C4 is good too, as it'll increase her burst damage by a lot. But I'd suggest to go for C2 or 1. Starting with Ascension, at level 90 she gains 19.2% crit rate, and the other stats are as the following. Also, while leveling her up, the talent leveling up priority should be first her elemental skill, then elemental burst, then finally normal attacks. Now going to her weapons, just like we have talked about earlier, her kit scales of attack, so naturally we'd want to take weapons whose stats revolve around attack. Starting off, the best weapon for her is obviously going to be her best in slot, which is called Absolution. As for the substats, the weapon gives crit damage as its substats, and the passive is something like, the character's crit damage will be increased by 20%, and increasing the bond of life value increases the character's damage by 12% for 6 seconds, and it can stack up to 3 times, so almost a 36% increase in damage at max stack. For those of you who are going to be pulling for her weapon as well, here's the value at different refinement levels. If you want some alternative options, some alternatives that you can use are Harengepaku Futsu, Mist Splitter Reforged, Primordial Jade Cutter, Light of Foliar Incision, Yuraka Misujiri. For 4-star weapons, you can use the Black Sword, which you can obtain from the Battle Pass. It's a pretty good weapon, as it buffs your normal attacks and gives you a small heal now and then, which can be converted to Bond of Life. And for free-to-play options, you can either use Finale of the Deep, this is a craftable weapon, or go with the 3-star weapon, Harbinger of Dawn. As for the artifact sets for her, you can use the new set called Fragment of Harmonic Whimsy, as this is going to be her best in slot artifact, or you can go for Gladiator's Finale. It isn't as good, but it's easy to farm as lots of bosses drop it. One other artifact I'd want to talk about is Thundering Fury. On paper it seems to perform pretty well, especially in aggravate comps, due to how its passive work, but it will most likely extend your rotation by a significant amount, as your skill comes off cooldown faster, which will lead to more frequent skill usage, and Clorinde being a mean DPS, like we talked about earlier, won't let you swap, because if you swap, her skill enters a cooldown which is a waste and may reduce your overall DPS. Also, you can use another artifact called Echoes of an Offering as an alternative. As for the main stats you want to prioritize on these artifact pieces are attack percentage on Sands, electro damage on Goblet, and crit damage or crit rate on Circlet. And the substats of the artifacts can revolve around crit damage, crit rate, energy recharge, and attack. Talking about these stats, Clorinde is a main DPS or an electro driver, with a heavy focus on attack percentage and crit damage, as her kit gives her a lot of free crit rate. Energy recharge is not a bad stat either, as her burst does lean into her skill by generating a lot of Bond of Life instantly. Finally, moving to the team compositions. First, let's take a look at an aggravate comp. Your main DPS will be Clorinde herself. A Dendro applier can be either ahhahaha or Kirara or any other Dendro character. For sub-DPS you can go with either Fischl, Miko, or Kujusera. And finally for support you can either use with Sucrose and Kazuha to trigger Swirl with Viridescent Veneer and reduce enemies' elemental resistance, or go with Shonli for more defensive support. For Clorinde's artifacts in this scenario, Thundering Fury does look like it'll do more damage than Fragment of Harmonic Whimsy over a single rotation, but it extends the rotation quite a lot, which may lead to overall loss of damage. So it'd be better to stick to the Fragment set. Second, looking at a quick bloom comp. Your main DPS is Clorinde herself. A Dendro applier can be someone like ahhahaha or Kirara. The sub-DPS can be either Miko or Fischl, and the Hydro applier can be either Furina or Yelan. This team is very similar to your normal quick bloom, and Clorinde is there to trigger electro reactions as well as trigger Yelan's burst if you use her. And finally an overload comp. Your main DPS is Clorinde again. For sub-DPS you can go with Fischl, Miko, or Kujusera. And for rest 2 you can use Chevreuse, as her damage increase to Pyro and Electro is pretty good. And finally go with Toma. You can go with Toma for that sweet interruptions resistance. Also, you don't want to use Bennett along with her because of her attack cap, so the buffs Bennett provides won't be of much use to her. Finally, now that you understand how her kit works, personally she somewhat reminds me of a certain someone. Other than that, she's not bad at all and a pretty good character overall, with a pretty nice damage output, so do pull for her without a second doubt.